think he's worried that he might lose the support around him, very much to your point. I think that Russia has more men and more old kit that they can throw at these offensives, and they can do more of them. But the impact that it's now having on the society and on Russia as a country, I think that worries Putin. In my mind, he's not worried about the election. The election's a sham, start to finish. But he is worried about losing his power to control and influence those people who give them the ability to have sham elections and the ability to lead the nation.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for TimesRadio with me, Kate Chabot. And this time we are catching up with former Supreme Allied Commander Europe, General Philip Breedlove. In his 39 years military service, he's held many other positions, including Commander US European Command and Commander US Air Forces in Europe. He has more than 3,500 flying hours as a fast jet pilot and is a highly respected commentator on the war in Ukraine. General Breedlove, welcome back. It's good to see you again. Are we, as one analyst puts it, in the midst of the biggest Russian strategic air campaign of the whole of 2023-24 winter?
I think that's a pretty good read of what's going on. To back up and put this in context, the Russian Air Force has largely failed Russia, and the first almost 2 years of this campaign, they have not done the things that we would expect from modern air forces for their troops. And in the past now, maybe 6 weeks, they've been throwing the Air Force at this problem and trying to establish the Air Force in a more traditional role in this fight. It has cost them dearly. They've lost over a dozen of their very best fighter aircraft. They've lost 2 in the air and 1 on the ground, AWACS command and control aircraft. It's not been easy for them. But we must say that now they're beginning to have effect. And we need to point right at ourselves in the mirror and understand that we own part of that effect. The slowdown here in America and a few other places in providing air defense capability are building and opening a window for Russia to more properly, or we would say as an airman, more properly use their Air Force.
And there was a huge concentration of missile attacks on the 21st of March on Kyiv, while this Kyiv Security Forum was ongoing. And this was followed by a barrage of drone and missile attacks on power plants and energy supplies in at least 7 other areas. It's been described as the most brutal attack against Ukraine's energy infrastructure since the full-scale war began. What does it tell us about their strategy? I mean, you're saying that they're kind of compensating for their failure in the air. What's going on now?
Well, again, I believe, and many other air power experts believe, that Russia's Air Force in this war has failed in the role that the West expects from an Air Force. They've been unable to do suppression of enemy air defenses. They've been unable to establish air superiority over their own troops. But in the end now, they have really pushed the Air Force out there, and they're beginning to slowly accomplish a few of those goals. One more time, in the context of the West slowing down its support and building this window of opportunity for Russia. But we would very differently apply air power from a Western viewpoint than the way Russia has done it. But we have to give them credit right now because this window is opening and they're using the Air Force, as you brought up. They have had significant impact. And you may want to talk about it later, but I just want to tease out one other little point you just mentioned. You know, they are striking energy all over Ukraine. And we're at a point where it appears my country has gone and told Ukraine to please stop striking Russian energy. And it is perplexing to me that we would adopt such a policy, and maybe we could talk about that later.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because I remember from a conversation we had, probably our first conversation, we talked about the kind of attacks that have been carried out in the Belgorod region, the first attacks of that kind. And you were very much of the opinion that Ukraine really does have the right to take the fight to Russia. When you heard of those reports that US officials were asking Ukraine to stop striking oil production in Russia for fear of affecting the market, the crude oil market. What was your first reaction?
Well, I think you and I have talked about this before. I want to just back up a little bit more. We have to remember that if you think of Ukraine and you, in your mind, think of the compass rose, Russia is attacking Ukraine from almost completely around Ukraine. Only the extreme western border of Poland and others. Ukraine is being attacked from Belarus, from Russia, from the Black Sea, and they're firing into Ukraine from all those directions. And they are using they're using Iranian kit. They're using North Korean kit. They're using any kit they can get, and they're firing into Ukraine. Yet, we in the West forbid Ukraine from using our kit to fire back into Russia. We have essentially built sanctuary for Russia from attack using our weapons. Now, Ukraine is getting better and better every day at developing their own weapons, and they're striking into Russia with their weapons. But I just want to make a point one more time. The policy that we will allow Russia to fire into Ukraine at will with anybody's kit, and we forbid Ukraine from firing back into Russia with our kit, it's absurd. It is really not the way to fight a war.
And just to expand on that, what is your response then to the German position on the Taurus missiles? That the German leader has again reiterated the reasoning for not supplying them for now, at least, being the fact to prevent NATO going to war with Russia.
So part of Germany's reticence is a failure of U.S. leadership. I think Germany is looking at the U.S., and we have purposely withheld the long-range ATACMS. We have not given any of these kind of missiles to Ukraine, et cetera, et cetera. We have taken counsel of our fears, and we are not willing right now to give Ukraine this very good capability to strike into Russia. Even though Ukraine has followed our directions explicitly in this war on the use of our weapons, we are not giving them. And I think that Germany, if America was to begin to give the long range, we call it a high explosive unitary warhead ATACMS, if we were to give that to Ukraine, it's way, can shoot way deeper than the ATACMS we're giving them now. Or if we were to give JASMs or any of those long range missiles that we have to Ukraine, then I think Germany would follow lead. But right now, a failure of U.S. leadership in this area, I think, is one of the huge reasons why Germany is also not offering them.
It doesn't look like it's going to happen anytime soon, does it? Let's face it.
No.
Well, can we just talk a bit about the kind of new capabilities being used in the aerial campaign? What can you tell us about Russia's new guided bombs and the problem that they're presenting to Ukrainian forces?
So we have had these kinds of bombs for a long time. They're really not new. They're new to Russia because Russia now has really been able to put the kit together to do what we did, use old dumb bombs and make them smarter and longer range with glide kits and GPS guidance units. And we have used these weapons effectively all the way back to Desert Storm 1. And it was sort of a revolution in technology at that time. But Russia has now gained this capability, and they don't want to fly over Ukraine because they get their airplanes shot down when they fly over Ukraine. So these glide bombs give them the capability to stay outside of Ukrainian defenses and lob these bombs in. And this presents several problems. One of them is, how do you defeat these bombs? Well, we could use multi-million dollar, missiles to knock them down. So now we are taking a $250, $300 glide bomb, and we're shooting it down with a multi-million dollar missile. You can't do that for very long. You're on the wrong side, we say, of the cost curve. And so the idea of trying to, I'm going to use some very simple terms. I hope you'll agree with how I'm doing this. The idea that we're going to be shooting at the arrows is a bad idea, because you're on the wrong side of the cost curve, and they can create a bunch of arrows cheaply. We need to be shooting at the archer. We need to go and destroy this at the source. For those missiles being fired surface to surface, we need to go destroy them at the source. And for the airplanes, we need to destroy those airplanes in the air before they can release the bombs. Of course, this is part of why we're trying to get F-16s into Ukrainian inventory, so that they can push these bombers back and they can go out there and destroy them while they're trying to employ these weapons. So we have the technology to shoot the arrows. We cannot afford to fight a war like that. We need to have the policy to go kill the archers. That's the way to win this part of the war.
What is the latest on the F-16s?
Well, everything that we have done for Ukraine, we always have this woe is me at the beginning of it. It's going to take them forever. They're not going to get it. It's going to blah, blah, blah. They have proved us wrong every time. They incorporated the Patriot in absolute minimum time, well under what we predicted. They've really absorbed Western tanks and used them well. Western artillery, they are doing that well. I love to tell a story all the way back to 2014, the counter battery radar systems we gave them in the Obama administration. We digitally limited those radars so that Ukraine couldn't use them in a certain way. Ukraine learned how to use them even better. And they teach us now how to use our kit. So there was doom and gloom predicted on F-16. It's going to take them forever. They won't be any good at it. I believe, watching their progress and what's going on, they're going to prove us wrong again. They will bring it on. But here is the problem. We're talking very small numbers. The United States has not given any F-16s, and we have the most of them to give. And so nations are putting F-16s forward. United States is being reticent and holding back. And the program is going to deliver F-16s. It's going to deliver F-16 pilots. They will be good. They would be great if we plug them into a better system of systems in Ukraine. Sensors, discriminators, command and control, shooters, etc. If we plug the F-16 into that, it will be awesome. But we are very, very limited in the contribution at this time, and that's horribly painful to watch.
Yeah, I'm hearing your frustration loud and clear. Are there any other developments in capability that you see noteworthy?
Well, we are going to learn from the Ukrainians on how to use small drones. Russia is carrying on a program of primarily larger drones, the drones they're buying from other nations, Iran and others. Russia is using sort of a drone series of attacks that are they're different. Ukraine, because they have such a small air force and they have husbanded it well, but it's still small and has had some losses. they have turned to small drones as an attack capability. And they are writing the books on how this kind of war is carried on. And they are extremely good at it. You remember me talking about the cheap glide bomb and we have to shoot it down with a Patriot. That's bad. Well, now on the other side, we've got Ukraine using these off the shelf type technologies, turning them into bomb dropping, very precise bomb dropping capabilities. And you got Ukrainian $500 drones with a mortar shell on the bottom of them, killing multi-million-dollar tanks on the Russian side. So Ukraine has taken a limitation of their Air Force, which deserves lots of credit for how well it served based on its size and things. But they have taken this small drone warfare to an exponential level of impact in this war. They are planking tanks. They are planking soldiers in the trenches. They are really taking the fight to Russia. And I want to compliment their drones on the sea for some of the work they did. But one of the most important wins they had, they went in there with small drones. They got the Russians looking up and focused on the small drones, and then they hit them with the sea drones. So they are using these almost over-the-counter capabilities and weaponizing them in incredibly uh, thoughtful ways, and it is changing how the battlefield looks.
And just on the subject of air defense systems, there are reports that the stocks of defensive missiles are running low and that Ukraine will soon have to ration its air defense systems. It's an article in the Washington Post saying that this was the message given by Ukrainian officials to US officials at a security conference. How desperate is it?
Well, I think I kind of already said it in an earlier answer, but let's just go over it again. What's happening is this slowdown in support from the West, and more specifically from the United States, is causing them to make decisions on the battlefield that are not optimum. Russia is shooting 8 shells at Ukraine for every one that Ukraine is firing back, and they're having to ration. They have had units on the front line run out of shells. It's the same thing with air defense capabilities. If we have to use these multi-million-dollar interceptors to shoot down these $200 glide bombs, we're in a bad place, and they're going to have to start rationing them. And I'll just say it one more time. The answer is we have to give them the ability to shoot the archer as opposed to having to shoot the arrow.
Just to talk about the ground war, on the ground, I've been told that there are signs that Russia is preparing a major offensive, and that could come as soon as around the end of this month, end of next month, sorry. Do you think that's a realistic prospect?
I think we have to treat it seriously. We also have to remember that Russia's ground maneuver is an attrition-based approach. They're sort of clumsy in the way they apply it, and they are less concerned with how many of their soldiers are chewed up by this kind of work. I think they still have a lot of soldiers. Their kit is not as good as it used to be because most of their good kit has been chewed up in the war so far. So if we have an offensive, quote unquote, an offensive, we can expect more sort of wave on wave attrition based attack. And that's a problem. It's a real problem because, again, Russia has more of kit and people than Ukraine does. And Ukraine has to be a little more careful to protect their ability to fight long term. And it just brings back the point that you and I were talking about moments ago. the resupply of the West is more critical now than it's ever been. And yet we're in a period of faltering in that resupply.
Ukraine has been criticised for not preparing more static defences in terms of trenches and dragon's teeth, etc. How would you assess the significance of traditional defences against Ukraine's more dynamic style of defence that we saw in the battle for Kyiv?
Well, you rightly point out that the battle for Kyiv, the Ukrainians, they probably don't use these words, but we in the West, and specifically we in the United States, we talk about defense in depth. And that's what Ukraine built around Kyiv, was a belt of defense in depth. And they really gave the Russian forces a whacking up there on the northwest side of Kyiv and on the north and northwest side of Kharkiv. But I think now there is a little more reticence to, I don't know this for sure, I'm observing. I think there's a little more reticence for digging in on the Ukrainian side, because what Ukraine does not want is there to be some new frozen line of contact that says to the world, okay, that's all rushing now and we're going to defend this. Because remember, there are big nations in the West right now who really would love to see Ukraine capitulate, give Russia more land. And sadly, the way I say it is, the West is willing to trade Ukrainian soldiers' lives, willing to trade the lives of Ukrainian people, and willing to give away Ukrainian land for our Western safety. Ukraine is fighting for their nation, but we are, I think in the West, some of our leaders are hoping that Ukraine will go to the table and find a way to give Russia what they need to stop.
It sounds incredible when you explain it like that an explanation for the fact that those defensive, permanent defense, that the trenches are not being built for fear that it might create a border or encourage the creation of a new border. I mean, it sounds ridiculous.
Yeah, I say one more time,
that
that's not something I've been told by the Ukrainians. That's the way I see what's happening on the ground. I don't think Ukraine, remember the line of contact. People forget that we've been fighting in Ukraine for 10 years. Russia invaded in 14, first Crimea and then the Donbass. And then Russia set up the line of contact, and the war has been going on the line of contact for a long time. And now there are people in the world who believe that everything east of that line of contact is now in some way legitimately Russian. It's not. And I think there's a reticence to set up another line of contact further to the west, which in some cases, when they went to the table, some might say, okay, everything east of that, and then blah, blah, blah. I don't know for sure. It is my reading of the situation that Ukraine does not want to establish a new line of contact further to the west and solidify it for negotiation time.
It's a very sobering thought. It's been reported that Vladimir Putin would have wanted to leave further mobilization until after his election to avoid bad war press. From a military perspective, how many unsuccessful or grinding offensive can an army like Russia's undergo before there are serious questions about strategy and aims?
Well, first of all, there are a lot of people that said that, or have said, they think that Putin was doing this, that, or the other because of the election. I understand why they're saying that. I don't agree with it. Putin has never feared losing an election ever, because he controls the election. He controls the outcome of the election. He's not worried about losing an election. I think he's worried that he might lose the support around him, very much to your point. I think that Russia has more men and more old kit that they can throw at these offensives, and they can do more of them. But the impact that it's now having on the society and on Russia as a country, I think that worries Putin. In my mind, he's not worried about the election. The election's a sham, start to finish. But he is worried about losing his power to control and influence those people who give them the ability to have sham elections and the ability to lead the nation. And I've been critical for a long, long time. I say, when is the last time that, when my country for years and years reacts to Russia, it's election, or it's sanctions, more sanctions, special sanctions, double secret probation sanctions, additional sanctions on top of the double probation secret sanctions. All we ever think about is sanctions. And sanctions, in my mind, has never changed Mr. Putin's mind. But we're beginning now to see a cumulative effect of this war, the diversion of Russian resources to the war, the sanctions around the edges, even though Russia is working through a lot of them. And I think that Mr. Putin is, again, not worried about losing an election. He's more worried about losing actually the people that give him the power base to do what he does in Russia. And I believe that is beginning to be an issue.
What about him losing control of public, and there being perhaps public order issues in the aftermath of these attacks on the Moscow concert hall? Because so far he's been able to basically ensure the support of his people, or at least by ruling by fear and stamping out, eliminating any dissent. Do you think there's any vulnerability there if the Russian public start to perhaps go out on the streets and demonstrate
Well, I
against?
would add one more tool. You talk about fear and stamping things out. He's working very, very hard to create an external enemy here. He's trying to blame this on Ukraine, the United States, the West. And so that's a big tool he uses, which is, there's a big boogie bear out there called the West and NATO and the United States, and everything bad happens because of them. That's a part of how he's maintaining that control. I think all the way back to Prigozhin and the Wagner group, we are beginning to see that Mr. Putin has to deal with some dissent in the troops. And I think that's, as I said just a few minutes ago, part of the fear is not losing an election, but losing that support base that allows him to be the kleptocrat that he is.
You mentioned earlier the impasse in terms of the support the West is giving, or the hesitation over its support for Ukraine. How much public and political interest are you feeling there in the war in the US at the moment?
The war is on the back burner because we're in presidential crazy land for politics with the coming election. You know, in our Congress, I still believe, and we have in the past had a pretty good base in the middle of the Congress on both sides of the aisle that understand foreign policy, international security affairs, and they understand the importance of getting it right in Ukraine. And there's long been this sort of solid base in there. Now we've got the crazy wacko lefties over on that side attacking anything that doesn't that has anything to do with spending money outside of America. And over on the wacko right, we've got the ultra nationalist slash isolationist group that is essentially doing the same thing as the wackos on the left. They're trying to drive out all notions of that aren't America first. Read isolationism. And so what's happening is in our politics, we have these two big issues out there. The president and the White House, while they're not giving Ukraine what they need to win, want to keep giving Ukraine what they need to stay viable on the battlefield. And, over on the right, there are people that want the border closed. We don't have a border in the South. I mean, it's really not there. And, now we have a Mexican president threatening to send more stuff at us. And so these two things are dominating politics. And if you seem to be wanting to support Ukraine, you're seen as a Democrat Biden person and you get attacked in that name. If you're over on the right and you're trying to close the border, you're labeled a Trump person and you are criticizing that right. And so that middle now is being divided because somebody's got to be our next president, and both sides are going to use the tools they can to get their candidate elected. I do believe that once we get through the craziness of presidential election season, you will see much of that middle begin to reassert itself in international security affairs and international policy.
Can Ukraine count on continued US support?
I believe they can. I believe that the support might be diminished in the future, but I believe that America will find its way back to supporting. As I said, once we get past presidential craziness, we'll see that middle once again beginning to act on behalf of Ukraine. But what Ukraine needs now, almost more than actual kit, is policy. We do not have a policy for Ukraine to win. As I described before, I think most of the capitals of the West have listened to Mr. Putin talking about nuclear exchange. They have listened to Mr. Putin talking about widening the war. Here in America, we hear the people that work for Mr. Putin talking about, and yes, once again, American soldiers are going to die on the battlefields of Europe. And our leadership has taken counsel of its fears, and they are making decisions now that very much limit the possibility of Ukraine winning this war. I think we're all hoping that Ukraine will, as I said before, we're not me, but I'm going to use the word we. We in the West are all hoping that Ukraine will go to the table and find a way to capitulate to Russia and give Russia what they want for peace. I do this for a reason I'll explain in a minute. And then we in the West will have accomplished our goals. You know, again, we are willing in the West to sacrifice Ukrainian soldiers, Ukrainian civilian, and Ukrainian land for our safety. And this is where we find ourselves.
So when you say peace, you mean it's just a temporary stop in the fighting and it will lead to something later on?
Absolutely. So think about it. 2008, the West's response to the invasion of Georgia was inadequate to task. We allowed Russia to hang on to 20% of the nation of Georgia. 2014, the West's response to the invasion of Crimea and the occupation of Crimea and the invasion and occupation of the Donbass, the West's response was once again inadequate to task, and we allowed Russia to hang on to about 12 to 13% of the most commercially important parts of Ukraine. And now here we are in 2024, and there's already talk about capitulate, give Russia what it wants to get peace. So 2008, 2014, 2024, we rewarded bad behavior. And we're looking to reward bad behavior again. Do you expect that we're going to get good behavior after that? No. I've raised 3 children and now I'm helping to raise 3 grandchildren. You reward bad behavior, you get more bad behavior. Okay. Russia will be back. You remember the 2 documents, Kate, that they gave us to read right before this war started? And in those documents, essentially, Mr. Putin lays out what he wanted us to sign, and that was a path forward for him reestablishing what would look an awful lot like the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. We understand his plan. He's already executing it in Georgia with dirty politics and dirty money. He's actually executing it in Transnistria and Moldova with some decidedly more physical paths. And it's way bigger than Ukraine. They will continue in Ukraine and they will continue in non-NATO spaces.
So, more than 2 years after the full-scale invasion, what is the correct, in your view, strategy or policy that the West should take towards Russia and towards the war in Ukraine?
So let me just use my country for an example, but you can extrapolate this to NATO. I believe, the first and most important thing that we need to give Ukraine is not some shiny piece of kit. The first and foremost thing we should give Ukraine is a publicly announced declaratory policy on what we're about in Ukraine. Let me use the two famous phrases that we hear in America, and you remember this from the first of the war. We're going to be there as long as it takes. We're going to give them everything they need. To a military man or woman who's in command, those are incomplete sentences. We're going to be there as long as it takes. To do what? Throw a birthday party, cross the river, throw Russia out of Ukraine. The to do what is the defining point that allows you to plan. We're going to give them everything they need. To do what? Again, throw a birthday party, cross the river, expel Russia from Ukraine. We need to tell the world, we in the West and we in the United States need to tell the world what we're about in Ukraine. And I believe the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian leadership have made it very obvious what they're about. They're in an existential fight for the very existence of their culture and their nation. And their goal is to expel Russia from Ukrainian sovereign lands and reestablish the nation of Ukraine before 2014, and as it was before 2014. There's a statement. We will give them everything they need to expel Russia from Ukrainian lands and reestablish the sovereign nation of Ukraine. We will be there as long as it takes to expel Russia from Ukrainian lands and reestablish the sovereign nation of Ukraine. Now we know how to plan, and now we can very easily identify when we shortfall, when we're not giving them the things they need to accomplish those goals. It would be, first and foremost, give them a clear declaratory policy of what the West is about in Ukraine, and then get after it.
General Philip Breedlove, spoken like a true military man. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Kate.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio. My thanks to Louis Sykes, our producer. To support the work of Frontline, hit the subscribe button. You can also listen to Times Radio throughout the day or read it at times.co.uk. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.